Good evening, this is Open Book. I'm Richard Wynnum.
The Lone Ranger.
When I was a very young lad living in a London suburb, I spent many of my days dreaming of riding a horse, 6 guns strapped to my waist on the dusty roads of the Old West. The Lone Ranger was my hero, and I waited eagerly each week to catch up with his adventures on the 9-inch screen of the family television. I didn't realize it then, but I know now that I was one of millions of viewers, one of whom was my guest, Stephen Eoannou, who was watching the show in Buffalo, New York, the city where the character was created by a writer called Fran Striker in the midst of the Depression in the 1930s. For reasons Mr. Eoannou will explain, Fran Striker has never really been credited with creating the character or writing the stories that introduced him to an audience hungry for a hero in the dark, hopeless days of the Depression.
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver. The Lone Ranger. Hi-yo silver! Away! With his faithful Indian companion Tonto, the daring and resourceful masked rider of the plains led the fight for law and order in the early West. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. The Lone Ranger rides again.
Striker is dead. Barrett read the article on page 53 of the Buffalo Evening News, not on the front page where it belonged. The newspaper shook in his hands, the headline blurred by tears. He'd been killed in a late afternoon car crash, a head-on collision that sent the other driver and his granddaughter to the hospital. Barrett was certain the accident had been Striker's fault. He could picture the crash as if he were reading one of his radio scripts. Striker behind the wheel, a Lucky dangling between his lips, the window cracked to let smoke coil in the autumn air. As his mind drifted from the highway to storylines, from storylines to characters, and finally from characters to scenes, the things that always cluttered Striker's mind. His car had drifted across the double yellow lines and into the path of the oncoming station wagon. He did not die on impact. He had time to be surprised by this final plot twist. Barrett was sure that as Striker sat pinned behind the steering wheel, his vision tunneling, he must have been thinking of the many ways he could describe the details surrounding the accident, the blood streaming from his scalp, laboring lungs about to quit, the cold spreading to his limbs, so his readers or listening audience would feel as if they were beside him, watching and hearing him die. The article listed all that Striker had accomplished in chronological order, but Barrett had known him before all that, before the radio and TV shows, before the books and comics, before his characters had become cultural phenomena. Barrett knew him when they were both young and Buffalo, New York was brimming with gangsters and bootleggers, dames and dolls, and there were not many heroes to be found, except for the two of them. They were best friends back when bathtub gin blinded, when magic shimmered on Buffalo sidewalks like lost silver waiting to be found, back when Barrett was the original Lone Ranger. Striker is dead, that much was certain, and Barrett hadn't spoke to him in 30 years. Return with us now to those thrilling days. Up here in Buffalo, New York, they ran the Lone Ranger in syndication after school. It would come on about 3:30 in the afternoon. Yeah, I remember watching it.
when even younger than that, I had a rocking horse. So I must have been aware of the Lone Ranger before that, because I was going to say I had a rocking horse that I named Silver. So I must have been even aware of the Lone Ranger even before that somehow, maybe from my older brother. But yeah, the Lone Ranger is one of my earliest, I guess, TV memories.
To be honest with you, Stephen, for me, it read almost like a fever dream.
Hmm.
Like if I were to consume psychedelics and then try to tell the story of the Lone Ranger, it might come out something like that.
Yeah, people have said that as well, that it's kind of it read like a fever dream to them. So I think that's interesting that multiple people have picked up on that fact, which I think is great. So, um,
I didn't realize until I Googled you today, as you do, that you grew up in Buffalo,
mhm.
which doesn't really, in terms of reading the book, it's completely irrelevant. But for my purposes, it's fun to talk to you about that, that you took something that was a part of history. This radio program made its debut on a Buffalo radio station in the depths of the Depression. And it's easy to understand why it became popular in the Depression. It's your description of life in the city. It's pretty bleak. Fran Striker and his extended family all sort of jammed into this. It's a house they live in, right? Not an apartment.
No, it was a house. Yeah, it was actually a side by side duplex.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yep. Um,
It
and
just feels very crowded. It feels like everybody's on top of each other.
yeah, and that was intentional. Really trying to dramatize not only the pressure that Stryker was under financially, but also creatively, just kind of being smothered and overwhelmed by everything. And that, that part of the story is absolutely true. Stryker did have a small family, starting a small family, had two young boys, and then as more and more of his extended family, both on his side as well as his wife's side, as they became uh, financially hurt by the Great Depression, he became financially supportive of about a dozen family members, some living with them, some not. And he was just under tremendous pressure to feed all the mouths and take care of everybody. So he, I think by nature, he was a workaholic. And if he wasn't a workaholic by nature, the economic forces of the early 1930s kind of made him one, because he was always hustling, trying to make the extra dollar by selling a script to another radio station in another part of the country. Scripts that had already been performed, series that already had run their course here in Buffalo. And there was one anecdote I read that, and this is in the book as well. This is before Xerox machines and printers and computers. So he was taking a sheet of carbon paper and trying to strike the keys as hard as he could, hoping to get two, maybe three copies of a script out of a typing session, so he could send them out to three different radio stations at once and see if anybody would bite. So yeah, bleak times for sure, and the Stryker family was really feeling it.
Well, I did the math, and I should say, with the caveat that my math skills wouldn't cause anybody any heartburn, but um, I figured that he wrote about 35 pages a day.
Um, I don't know about pages. I know in his son's biography, which was very helpful to me, it was called His Typewriter Grew Spurs. Um, Fran Striker Jr., talking about his dad, said that the Guinness Book of World Records had estimated that during the 30s, during the peak of really the Lone Ranger taking off in terms of not only radio scripts, but comic books and comic strips, and live in-person appearances by the Lone Ranger, that that Stryker would script out and write. They estimated that he was writing about 60,000 words a week, which is like a short novel. And again, it's not Faulkner, right? It's not Shakespeare, but it's still 60,000 words is tough to argue with.
No doubt. I figured 250 words a page. That works out to about 35 pages a day, which is, as you say, that's a huge output. And I wonder, from a writer's point of view, I mean, this poor bloke is under the gun, right? He's trying to support 12 people at a point in time. Well, one of the things that I found really interesting, and I think we perhaps reading the book don't immediately bear in mind, radio was really new at that point, and nobody was really sure if it's even going to last.
Yeah, I like to make the analogy that, think of the early days of the streaming platforms when Netflix came on the scene. All those platforms were starved for content.
Hmm.
And it was the same thing in the early 30s with radio because it was brand new. And at that time, radio stations had full orchestras in-house. They had their own acting troupe, their own writers like Fran Striker, and the smaller radio stations especially were just desperate for content. And that's why Stryker was sending those scripts out across the country, for between $2 and $7 an episode, because he thought, hey, if you buy episode number one, you're going to buy episode number two the next week. And it was really quite fascinating that the early days of radio was like the introduction of any other new medium that came after. They were starved for entertainment content, and Stryker was doing his best to provide it.
Clearly. And a second imagination, not only the Lone Ranger, but also the Green Hornet. I mean, those are two enduring characters that he created.
Yeah, huge impact on 20th century pop culture. And when I first stumbled across Fran's story, and I've told this story many times, I was either at a bar or a party, and somebody had mentioned that Fran Striker, or no, somebody had mentioned that the creator of the Lone Ranger was from Buffalo. And I said, no, that's not true. I'm from Buffalo. I live here. I'm a Buffalo-based writer, and the city is very good about embracing anyone who's had any success in the arts. And I said, I would have heard about that. And, sure enough, I Googled it. And not only, as you said, did he create the Lone Ranger, but the Green Hornet and Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. And I said, well, how can I not have known this? And I did some more digging, and I think the answer is twofold. Is one, because he sold the rights away early, his name got kind of overshadowed by the man he sold it to, George W. Trendle, owner of WXYZ in Detroit. And then, to make matters worse, in the 1940s, Trendle started claiming that he was the creator of the Lone Ranger. And that lie never went corrected. Stryker was a very quiet, gracious man, and he never, called him out in public or private. And he let that kind of lie kind of last really up until today. So even if you go out to the Wikipedia page and you look at the first sentence is, the Lone Ranger was created by either George W. Trendle or Fran Striker. And of course, Trendle never had any background in being a creative person. He was a businessman, first in Nickelodeons, then movie theaters, and then radio stations, while Striker had his first short story published, when he was 12 years old in a local newspaper. So I was surprised that someone who had such an impact on pop culture in this country was kind of forgotten.
Agreed. It's kind of sad. And this guy Trendle reminds me a little bit of Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want no spoilers, but Trendle realized that, Stryker was under such financial pressure. And so he offered him a deal that Stryker couldn't turn down, job security, more money than he ever made. He could take care of all the members of his family. He guaranteed him a job for the duration of the Depression. But the catch was he had to sell the Lone Ranger to him for $10. And you got to remember, Stryker was selling individual scripts of the Lone Ranger for $7 to Trendle at that point. But, Stryker did what he thought was best for his family. Fast forward to 1954, I believe it was, when Trendle sold the rights when the Ranger was making the transition from radio to television. He sold it for $3 million. So it was a pretty good return on investment for $10. And at that time, that was a record sale in the entertainment history. So, of course, all that money went to Trendle. I think he gave Stryker like a $10,000 bonus or something. But then you have to think about, in that 20-year period, all the other income streams that Stryker generated for Trendle. The books, the comic strips, the toys, the plastic guns, the hats, the mask, all those kind of spin-off toys was revenue that went directly into Trendle's pocket that Stryker missed out on. So not only did Stryker miss out on the fame, he also missed out on the fortune.
It's good that you've, I hope, set the record straight. Because a number of the synopses of the novel characterize Fran Striker's life as controversial. Is that what they mean by controversial? Because he didn't receive the credit that he was due?
Yeah, I think his son summed it up best in that biography I mentioned, that he said his father was part of either the worst deal in entertainment the entertainment industry or the best deal, depending on your perspective. So I think the controversy was the controversy of not only selling the rights for such a ridiculously low amount of money, but also who was the creator, and letting that kind of linger for 90 years now. I think that's where the controversy stemmed from.
And I think somebody who's created an iconic character like that's vindication for him as a writer. And maybe that was, while obviously he was trying to support his family, and that was very important to him. At the same time, he's a writer and he's a creative person. And to create an iconic figure like that, in fact, more than one. I'm not sure about Sergeant Preston. I'm not sure that he's very well remembered, but certainly the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger are iconic popular culture figures. The idea of what you're talking about, all that merchandising, that was a new idea too, right, at that point in time.
Yeah, because again, these are the very early days of radio. So the Lone Ranger preceded, Batman and Superman and Roy Rogers and, Shirley Temple. So, the idea of, hey, we can make a Lone Ranger doll or a Lone Ranger holster and sell that was still a new idea. And the Ranger was a trailblazer in a lot of areas, and merchandising certainly was one. Appearances, you open up a supermarket, you could get the Lone Ranger to show up on silver, and Stryker would script it all out, what he would say, and how long he would be there. He would do the same thing to go and address Boy Scout troops. So he was really, for early 30s, mid 30s, really kind of blazing the trail for new ways of promotion.
And also, not to put too fine a point on it, giving people hope at a point where, as you said at one point in the novel, there was a sense of everything ending.
Right.
It's hard to imagine, what it was like to live in the 1930s in this country, where the 1920s, the country had been on a roll,
right?
And happy days are here again and all that. And then to be hit with the depression, and it must have felt as if the dollar wasn't worth anything anymore. And how do you even begin to survive? All of which explains why he did what he did. I love the way that you wove into the story. It's almost that it's sort of just woven into the story, little Easter eggs, the horse named Silver, the white horse, the mask, all of that. That slowly but surely, these details all begin to coalesce for the reader, as they're beginning to coalesce in Fran Striker's imagination.
Probably the biggest, I know it is not probably, it is the biggest historical inaccuracy in the novel was saying that Stryker had writer's block. He never had a minute of writer's block. But I wanted to do that to put those Easter eggs, to hide the Lone Ranger tropes in there, because part of the idea I was exploring was, where does the idea for stories come from? And my answer, at least up to this point, is, well, they're really all around us, and you just have to be perceptive, and you never know what you may see or hear or read that may help you form a story, not only in immediately, but maybe sometimes years down the line, you might remember something and bring it in. So that was great fun putting those Easter eggs in there. I was at a book club a couple weeks ago, and Forest Lawn Cemetery is a real place here in Buffalo, and there is a statue of Chief Red Jacket, and in front of the monument are headstones of other Seneca Indians who were runners during the Civil War for General Grant. And in the novel, I list the headstone names, and one of them I put was Kimosabe. And I was at this book club, and the man said, I drove out to Forest Lawn Cemetery, and I was looking for that headstone, and it's not there. And I said, yeah, I know that was part of the fiction. It's a historical novel, but it fit, and it was part of the idea of hiding those Easter eggs, because everything was all around Fran. But like you said, it had to coalesce. He had to bring it all together, and eventually, of course, he did.
It's Tonto that refers to the Lone Ranger as Kimosabe, I think, right?
Right. And fun fact, the Tonto didn't come on the scene in the radio series till the 10th or the 12th episode, when Stryker finally realized he couldn't have the Lone Ranger either talking to Silver or talking to himself for 30 minutes every week. So he had to create a buddy for him.
You were talking to somebody and you said, Yesteryear is a unique book in that I've mixed genres. It's part noir, part comic novel, part historical fiction, part biographical fiction, part caper with a dash of magical realism tossed in for good measure. The caper is quite entertaining. That whole thing about the boxer and two diamond rings, and like an old Keystone Cops movie plot,
So Jimmy Slater, again, another real life character. He was a light heavyweight champ of the world for a very brief part of time. He was from South Buffalo. Part of the fun as a writer that I had in working on Yesteryear is my parents grew up during that era. They grew up during the Depression. My father lived above his grandfather's restaurant, and a boxer, wasn't Slattery, would come in and have my dad hold his diamond ring for him because he was going to go out on a drinking bender. And when he would come home after the bender, he'd come back to the restaurant and reclaim his ring because he didn't want to lose it while he was out drinking and gambling. And I remember that, my father telling me that story. And I thought, well, we'll make it Slattery's ring. And we'll double up. We'll make it 2 diamond rings. And so that was something I introduced early to the story that kind of came right from one of my dad's stories that he would tell when I was growing up.
Very ribald at times too, apparently, those stories. And that's very artful, the way you did that. Somebody asked you about if you have any tricks, and you said, I've learned to write with confidence. And I would suggest that no matter what you do, I've come to believe that that's what it's all about. If you have confidence, you can do almost anything. It's because we question ourselves so often and say, well, I don't know, that sounds like an idea, but I'm not sure I can do that. The person who just does it is at least admirable, and I think often probably most successful. But then you went on, even when I'm writing blindly, which is often the case. So, and once you said that, I thought, you've got all these threads going, the caper with the rings and all that, the other stories that you got from your dad about the restaurant and the people who went to the restaurant and the food they ate, and the restaurateur's attitude to his customers, all of which, is, again, What must it have been like to run a restaurant at a point in time where most people didn't have two nickels to rub together? So you're serving food, but inevitably you're going to have to say to people who are obviously hungry, I'm sorry, if you can't pay for it, I can't give it to you. Otherwise, you're
Right.
not going to survive either. So
Yes.
it was, I think, an opportunity perhaps again for you to um, give a very insider's view of what life must have been like at that point.
Yeah, and again, I did a lot of research for this novel about the early days of radio, about the Depression, certainly about the Lone Ranger and its origin story. But again, a lot of it was from, listening to my mom and dad telling their stories of growing up in that area, and especially in that Genesee Street area where all the Greek immigrants, like my family, all that was the Greek neighborhood. So I loved hearing those stories growing up, and they found its way into my work, and they still do. The idea of writing with confidence, I was thinking specifically of two books, W.P. Kinsella's Shoeless Joe, which the movie Field of Dreams was based on, and The Natural by Bernard Malamud. Both happen to be baseball novels. And I wanted to write something in the vein of those two novels, the type of language, the type of myth making and storytelling. And since they're both baseball novels, my mantra when I was writing yesteryear was just swing away, just swing for the fences, which meant anything could go in this book. No character could be painted with too broad of a brushstroke. No joke was off limits. No sentence could be too long. If it's wrong, if I get it wrong, I'll just go down swinging and fix it later. And that was my kind of cavalier attitude of approaching this novel, and it kind of took a lot of pressure off, during the drafting stage. Just write it, just swing away, and whatever happens, happens. We'll fix it later.
Well, you have such great characters too, like the guy who he's the funeral director,
Yeah,
but he's a gangster at the same time, right?
yeah. Again, that is a true part of Buffalo history. Um, Stefano Magaddino ran the Buffalo mob for decades. And he did have a couple funeral parlors, and his nickname was the Undertaker. And the joke that I put in there that the only thing working during the Depression was the Undertaker's ovens, his crematorium ovens, because that's how he'd get rid of rivals and witnesses. That was true. That was a true joke at the time. Um, so I already had, real life characters that needed to be in here. Stryker, obviously, Trendle, obviously. John Barrett was the first Lone Ranger on the radio when it premiered in Buffalo. Jimmy Slattery I had brought in. So I said, well, why not I bring in, the mob? Why don't I bring in Magaddino? And it was just great fun writing about him in a funny way. And it was interesting. Again, I was at that same book club a couple of weeks ago, and someone said, "Were you kind of nervous? Because he was a big deal in this town for, you know, up until the '70s, I think. There's still family members around." And I said, "Well, chances are they're not going to be, readers of fiction. But even so, I think that Magaddino." My fictitious version of him was much more likable and uh, than he was in real life.
I guess we've come to accept those kinds of characters because of Hollywood and the movies that, to live around people like that who appear to be, well, I guess you could point to one of the people running for president right now. They appear to be bulletproof, they appear
Yep.
no matter what they do, they get away with it, you know. And at one point, there's the suggestion that the policeman who was thought to be, a guy who had he'd become a policeman because he had, well, essentially the Lone Ranger's credo: a man should live by the rule of what is best for the greatest number. So you have this kind of wonderful philosophical backbone for this character. He is an ideal. He lives an ideal. And in some sense, the cop in the story is also a man who is perceived to live that kind of ideal, but has been corrupted by these people.
Yeah, and uh, what you mentioned, that man should live by the rule for what is best for the greatest number, that was part of the Lone Ranger Creed that Fran Striker wrote
Okay.
for the Lone Ranger fan club for the
Ah,
kids. And Fran was very conscious of the impact and popularity of this character that he created. And he wanted to have the children, his listeners, um, be good citizens. And so he came up with this creed, this Lone Ranger creed that was sent out to all the club members. If you want to be like the Lone Ranger, this is the way you have to live your life. And from everything that I've read, that really was reflective of Stryker's personal code and the ethics that he lived by. So that was a reflection of Stryker himself, which I was really impressed with. And I tell people I wasn't really a Lone Ranger fan, but I became a Fran Striker fan by writing this book. The other thing that Stryker did is, as the Lone Ranger's popularity grew, and WXYZ was hiring more writers to take the burden off of Fran. Um, Stryker wrote out guidelines for how the Lone Ranger should be depicted. Clean shaven, always use perfect grammar. Can't be seen in a saloon. If it's a saloon setting, make it seem to be like a restaurant. Because again, Stryker was so concerned about how his character would be affecting his young audience that he wanted to make sure that great care was always taken in this character's portrayal. So I just thought that was a fascinating way of having his own code of ethics and the rules that he lived by kind of manifest himself in this iconic, fictitious character from the Old West. Last year was the 90th anniversary of the radio debut of the Lone Ranger. So for 91 years now, he has been a tremendous part of our culture. Unfortunately, the last movie version of him starring Johnny Depp was a terrible movie. But what's interesting about that, if you do make it to the end when they roll the credits, you'll see that it says that based on the characters created by George W. Trendle. So even at this late date, Stryker still isn't getting his due.
we're striking a blow for Striker, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stephen Eoannou's latest novel, Yesteryear, has just been published. This is Open Book. My other guest this evening, singer and songwriter Pi Jacobs, who, according to her bio, draws inspiration for songs like this one from her unconventional upbringing in the land of weed and wine, aka Northern California, now makes her home in Southern California. This is a song from her most recent album.
Hallelujah, it's just me again. I've been waiting for the front door to slam. Now I'm nobody's lover or mother or friend. Hallelujah, it's just me again. Oh yeah. Oh, I got some love I like to give. I got some love here. Have a sip. Oh, hey, that's enough. Don't take it all. You had enough, dear. Nothing's left. Hallelujah, it's just me again. I've been waiting for the front door to slam. Now I'm nobody's lover or mother or friend. Hallelujah, it's just me again. Oh yeah. love, don't ask for much. I need some love here. Just a taste. Still you don't see, that you don't hear, that you don't know, dear. I will waste. You know it's breaking me. Your every little need. If I was gone, yeah, you would be just fine on your own. Oh, hallelujah, it's just me again. I've been waiting for the front door to slam. Now I'm nobody's lover. You know, I'm nobody's mother. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. It's just me again. Oh, oh yeah, yeah.
Pi Jacobs is our guest. So you normally play that with a band, right?
Well, I do a lot of touring like this with, you know, when I'm solo with the Stomp Box, that I know nobody can see it, but these guys are my feet. And, you know, that's just sort of a necessity of getting out on the road and making it all work. But I do have a band, and I play with them whenever possible, so...
So the lyric says, "Hallelujah, it's me, I'm here." So when you play it solo, it gives that lyric a different sense than it would if you played it with a band.
Well,
according to your bio, they're saying that that is an expression of an introvert who's happy to have some alone time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people think it's a breakup song on first listen, and really I wrote it, you know, the first day when we were starting to leave the house and go out after the pandemic, and after a year and a half, I was suddenly alone. And, you know, I love my husband and my dog and my friends that lived just next door to us, but it was like everyone was gone, and I was like, you know.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
It took me quite some time to understand that if I don't let my wife just go off by herself for at least a portion of every day, she's fit to be tied within a couple of days.
Yeah, that's me. That's me. It's funny, people don't think so because I do this, you know, and I'm on stage, and that's very exposed and extroverted. But maybe because I do that, like when I'm not doing this, not playing music, I'm sort of at home with a book and being quiet. So, yeah.
It's always struck me as a paradox that so many people who do what you do are introverts.
It's weird, I know.
because it takes a lot out of you to do what you do, right?
Well, you know,
to make that connection all the time.
But for me, like, music is a safe space. Like, if you told me I had to go talk to a stranger on the street about something that wasn't music, I'd be horrified and terrified. But this is my best place to connect with people. Yeah, it does seem like a paradox.
It is, but at the same time, I hear what you're saying, that when you start playing music, you lose that self-consciousness and just become one with the music, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also, you know, this is the not so spiritual part of it, is like I'm in control when I'm doing this. You know what I mean? I have the mic, and I'm, you know, if I'm doing my job, hopefully I'm making people have a good time, you know? But it isn't, you know, it isn't like walking up to a stranger on the street and saying, "Hi, I like your shoes," you know? Yeah.
So, not to put too fine a point on it, I've never met anybody born in Haight-Ashbury.
Oh, well.
That must have been an interesting place to grow up, I would think.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so freighted with cultural
Yes.
resonance. Huh?
Yes. Well, it's in the bio, I think, to sort of try to explain, myself. My mom, my parents weren't together for very long, but my mom, was a for real hippie, like a commune dwelling, food growing hippie. And so, yeah, when I was born, we lived in the Haight-Ashbury. We lived in a commune for a while that was right there on Baker Street. And then, like all good hippies, we moved way out into the country. And so I'm both sort of a city girl and a country girl, the extremes, so.
Well, that makes sense, given the sound of your music.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
They're both in there,
Huh.
It bothers me a little bit that quote-unquote hippies get such a bad rap.
Do they?
I would argue that so many of their ideas have now become completely mainstream.
Absolutely.
And everybody just takes it for granted.
Yeah.
And yet you talk about hippies, and so many people sort of wrinkle their nose and say, hippies, like...
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like, my husband is also from a similar type of situation. Although, like, my folks were more party hippies, and his folks were radical political hippies. But it's this understanding that we have of each other. And, as children of that, we have all kinds of things in common. Like, one of the things we say is, like, how do you make your own mark, when your parents changed the world, which they did do, so it's something that we've talked about, One of the things that's weird is that, we've been married a long time, and a lot of our peers have been married a long time, got married young. And I think part of it is we had so much chaos and, like, different people coming and going in our lives when we were little that, like, we both really wanted a family, like a solid base, So.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, those ideas are pretty cool, but hey, don't leave out that it's also chaotic, and it's hard for a person trying to find their way in the world to do that.
Well, it's
when
not
they're
great for
surrounded by
kids.
that,
It's not great for kids.
Yeah.
I think
it should have been, but it wasn't.
If I had been, that generation, I would totally have been a hippie. It looks like a ton of fun. It wasn't all that great to be a kid during that. Some of it was great. I mean, there was so much creativity in my family life, and I saw so much music, and my mom does theater, and, I went to these little hippie schools that taught me how to work the abacus and things like that. But, so I'm grateful for all that. I don't mean to sound ungrateful. I think you can have both. I mean, it's what I'm aspiring to have in my life is there's a lot of risk in my life. I mean, I'm driving around the South by myself, showing up at places and playing music. But then I go home and I have a husband and a dog, and I'm pretty, just average when I'm at home. So I think you can have both.
I think you can too. And I think that was the realization that happened in the third generation, which is the people I talk to now. They could be my grandchildren. And they have a lot of the same ideas and the same mores, but they've also got that history to draw on. So they saw and then, if you look at these kids at Columbia University right now and the other universities across the country, it looks just like the 60s.
Yes. Yeah, and I find myself somewhere in between, like, kids that are just going to high school right now and hippies, obviously. And it's, I really struggle sometimes to have an open mind, but I really try because I think it's important. And I think every generation has something to teach everybody, I mean, one of the big ones right now is all the transgender stuff. And I swear to God, I don't have children, but every one of my friends' children is like, I don't know what my pronouns are. And, to me, I'm like, that baffles me a little bit, but I'm trying to just go with it, like, okay, I'll listen. I'll call you whatever you want me to call you. Great.
I can relate to that. I mean, teenagers, you're still becoming.
Sure.
So, of course, you don't know what pronoun you are.
I know.
But, you'll
You
figure
don't
it
know
out.
you don't know anything really.
No.
But in terms of like, at least, well, gender is different, but I mean, in terms of your sexuality, if you're going to figure it out, don't worry.
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad I didn't have to go through that.
No, I know. Me too.
The gender roles are pretty clear when we were kids,
Yeah.
Not necessarily, and that's maybe you don't necessarily want that rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
Girls do this, boys do that,
Yeah.
But as you say, when it comes to your sexuality, it
Usually.
must be confusing, I would think.
Yeah.
As if it's not confusing enough already.
Right. I mean, I think it's good to separate those two things. And I mean, maybe this is the furtherance of the women's movement, right? Because I know that my mom being a feminist, I just assume I can do things that she didn't assume. I assume birth control. I assume I can do whatever I want with my life and my job. I assume I can play guitar. I assume I can play the stump box. And I don't know, I don't think her generation assumed those kinds of things. So
it was just becoming, but at the same time, as has been pointing out in innumerable documentaries, make me a cup of coffee, would you? Why are you asking me? Just because I'm female,
Right.
So yeah, we all had a lot to learn about that, and that has taken.
Yeah. I mean, my mom used to say, we lived in a commune, right? And she's like, all the women did all the cooking and cleaning, always. We were so free thinking and so radical, and we had never looked at our division of labor, And I mean, I think that I've taken that a step further than my mom for sure, We have discussions sometimes where I'm like, so your ideas are not actually that feministic. And she thinks I'm, crazy, but there you go.
Well, I think we're all the product of where we were born and grew up. So these were 50s kids, and everything on the television portrays women in very specific, gender-specific roles, and probably their parents, for the most part, were echoing those gender divides.
And
It's not just going to disappear
No.
because you start challenging some of the broader.
Oh my God. When I
mores,
first started playing music, it was awful. It's gotten so much better. I mean, I had a guitar teacher that hit on me. I'd go into Guitar Center. They'd say, hey, little lady, here's a pink guitar, I mean, it was just awful. I was the only female in jazz band at school. And it was, I could tell so many stories. But not only is it better now, but also I'm better now. I don't tolerate that. So, yeah. Hopefully I set an example for somebody younger than me. I hope,
I grew up with, among others, Joni Mitchell.
Yeah.
And I just took it for granted what she did.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me until fairly recently just what kind of courage it took to do what she was doing.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because this album that we're promoting right now is my 10th album. So I was trying to describe to someone said, I really like it. It's really good. And I said, well, I think I finally on number 10 figured out how to make an album. And this is the first one I've had where I don't listen to it, and all 1 through 9 I can point out where I caved and didn't follow my instincts or let somebody else tell me what I should do with my music. And I can point that out to you on every single album. And on this one, I fought for everything. And I had to fight hard, actually. And usually, again, I'm the only female with the producer and the band and everybody else. But I finally just got everything I wanted. And I love it. It's so rewarding. I listen back and I don't go, ew, at any moment during the album. So it's pretty great.
What kind of things did you have to compromise on before?
If I didn't like the vocal tone, I have a favorite mic now, and I just bring it. I'm like, we're using this one because it's how I want to sound. I was listening to my very first album the other day, and the producer was like, "We need a flute on this track." I'm like, "No, we don't." And there's this flute solo, and it's ridiculous on the track. It's just dumb, people coming in and rewriting my songs, going, that chord isn't good, and it's not that I don't co-write or I don't listen, because other people have good ideas, but when it's the change doesn't make it better, you should fight for that. So
do you feel this was males who just weren't taking you seriously?
it's always males. I mean, I very rarely get to work with women, very rarely, and it's usually pretty different when I do. Not always, but yeah, it's just how it is. There's just a lot more men in music still, and
That's true.
and yeah,
But at the same time, I don't know. From my perspective, it looks as if women are gaining more and more ground all the time.
I think that's true.
You know?
I do. I think it's true, but I don't think it's equal or egalitarian yet.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Because inevitably, again, as it was for your mum, there's going to be pushback.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody gives up power easily.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking serious power. But at the same time, so much of that power has disappeared anyway, because the record companies are not what they were. You have a lot more autonomy as a performer, I think, right? As a record maker, how you promote it.
Yeah. All that. Yeah. I mean, it's.
Do you get to choose your producer?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But that hasn't always been the case, I'm getting.
Not always. No. I did 2 albums with a little label here in the South in Virginia called Traviana, 2017 and 2020, and I co-produced the second one, which was great. But the first one, they just said, "Here's your producer," and I went out to their little studio farm out in Floyd, Virginia, which is tiny, and they're like, "Okay, here's your producer. We're going to do this in 3 days," and we did. We did it, but I kind of wanted that experience because I was like, well, I'm not going to sign with this little bluegrass label and not see what they can do with my music. Like, if it's going to be a collaboration, it's going to be a collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So in that case,
Was
I
it?
didn't. Yeah, I really like that record. That's a record called A Little Blue. The only thing, again, there's always one little thing, is, like I said, they had me do it in 3 days. I'd like to take a lot longer with lead vocals. 3 days for tracking, fine. But lead vocals, sometimes takes you a while to learn how to sing something, and
That's interesting, even though you write it.
yeah, you write it and then, you sing it a lot. And by the time you're done singing it a lot, you will have changed all the little things that make it either a great vocal or just an okay vocal. You add a little inflection here, a little cry there, or a growl or something, That's when you get artistic with it.
Would you give us an example?
Oh my goodness. Okay, that song I just played, there's the pause where, I was gone, you would be just fine on your own. That's how it goes on the record. Oh, hallelujah. And it's in time. I don't stop. But live, and I hope we can do it, it's fun to do it this way. I go, you would be just fine on your own. And that's so much more interesting. Oh, hallelujah. But that took me a while to go, what feels right here?
Yeah. So you write a lyric and then you figure out a way that you can deliver it in the way to get the feeling you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, because the delivery is where the emotion comes in too.
Right,
You know,
right.
words also matter very much, but you can make the words kind of hit home if you sound like you really mean it.
Would you do one more song and then we'll quit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry,
No,
Pi, it was fun talking to
I'm
you.
so enjoying talking. Yes. Okay. So I did that one. Okay. This is kind of just funny. This song is a song I wrote with my friend Ted Russell Camp, who is a bass player and wonderful artist. And I had the chorus because a few years ago I was in a recording studio and I come running in and I go, "Oh my God, this happened!" And my producer said, "Pi, don't get too high." And he goes, "But don't get too low either." And I always thought that was an amazing saying. And so I came in with this chorus about, too high, too low. And my buddy listened to it and he said, "This is exactly what it's like being a musician. You can't, you got to roll with everything." And so we wrote the song, and it contains in the song the worst gig we ever did and the best gig we ever did. So. I don't get too high or too low. Winning and losing streaks come and go. I'll take a deep breath or slow my roll. I don't get too high or too low, no. Me and my guitar got an hour to go. Just 10 more songs and a long drive home. There's a handful of folks and they're watching the game. The blue light can't hide, they feel sorry for me. He said, "Hey, can you sing like that girl on TV? She reminds me of you. She's the real thing. When an ocean of low try to bring me down, oh, I take a deep breath and get lost in the sound. Take a deep breath and get lost. I don't get too high or too low. Winning and losing streaks come and go. I'll take a deep breath or slow my roll. I don't get too high or too low, no. Me and my guitar, the curtain closed. I feel a hush of a crowd. Oh, I'm ready to go when the lights come up and my voice fills the room. There's nothing else, just me and this tune. Oh, you know the notes that I hit. Oh, the stories are on. I feel a wave of applause at the end of the song. At first they're all shy, but now they cut loose. Let's share a few laughs, 3 chords and the truth. We'll share a few laughs and the truth. I don't get too high or too low. Winning and losing streaks come and go. Take a deep breath or slow my roll. I don't get too high or too low. Don't get too high. I don't get too low. No, no, no. I don't get too high. I don't get too low. No, no, no. Don't get too high. I don't get too low. No, no, no.
That was great. Thanks, Pi. I love the way you accent the guitar with the kick box. It sounds really good.
Thanks.
Fun talking.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.